So good evening. Do appreciate everyone being here and having this opportunity to talk to you. We are going to be looking at the book of Genesis. However, kind of like earlier today, this is going to be a little different. We're not going to proceed on into chapter 9, but rather I'd like for us to look at some of the physical evidences that we see in the world of the flood that we just really talked about the past few sessions. So there are some different things that we'll look at. And the idea is just to show some of these things that are the results of the flood. And my sources for a lot of these things, which I don't always give this like I should, but it's the Biblical Science Institute, Answers in Genesis, is Genesis History, the Institute for Creation Research, Genesis Park, and of course, the Bible itself. So I just want you to know where I'm getting some of this information from. These organizations of scientists, they are Christians that are scientists that study these things, are experts of these things, unlike me. I'm not an expert, of course, but they can explain a lot of things about this evidence. We're just going to touch on some of these things. First off, let's remind ourselves what the Bible says about creation and what we can see in creation. If we look at Romans chapter 1, verses 18 through 21, "For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who suppress the truth in unrighteousness, because what may be known of God is manifest in them, for God has shown it to them. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. Because although they know God, they did not glorify him as God, nor were thankful, but became futile in their thoughts, and their foolish hearts were darkened." God clearly shows us the truth in his creation, in his works, and all the things he's done, including the flood. There's a lot of evidence, a lot of things that are right there for us to see it. Sometimes we need people who study those things to explain some of it to us. That's reasonable. But a lot of these things are right there in plain view. Now, the world struggles with this, and as these verses mention, there are people who suppress the truth in unrighteousness. And the word for unrighteousness there, it means active distortion of what is right, a hostility toward truth that provokes divine wrath. So they refuse to see the truth, and this causes their hearts to be darkened. In other words, they're blinded by the rejection of God and the truth. And we see this in other areas of the world and society, of course, because people reject God and the truth, so their thoughts become corrupted, and they tend to start believing things that are not true. So if we look at 2 Peter for a moment, because he mentions things along this line. 2 Peter chapter 3, verses 5 and 6. "But they deliberately forget that long ago by God's word the heavens came into being, and the earth was formed out of water and by water. By these waters also the world of that time was deluged and destroyed." So notice that they deliberately forget, or we could say reject or ignore what is known, what God tells us, the truth. So this is the attitude of many in the world, and this is why it's important for us to look at and see these evidences. The world will not tell us the truth in these areas a lot of times, because they have rejected the truth, they have rejected God. They've come up with other ideas and other thoughts about these things. And we must always examine ourselves and make sure that we're following God's word. So with that in mind, if we get to our subject of the evidences of the flood, I want to briefly discuss just a few things. Flood traditions, rock layers, those are historical markers and evidence of the past. Fossils like trees, fish, plants, birds, and even maybe a few dinosaurs, not much. But we're just going to touch on some of these things. And the idea is to support our faith with knowledge and facts, things that we can see. We don't necessarily need these evidences, but so many times, so many people in the world will tell us that there's no evidence for the flood, and that is just a lie. So we want to make sure that we can refute that lie, even if it's only in our own minds and our own hearts, for our own sake, for the Lord's sake too, but for our soul's sake. So first, the flood traditions. Now, there's a lot of stuff here in a way, because along the top of this chart, along the top is a bunch of different like countries or cultures, reigning from the Babylonians on down towards the end to Hawaii, of all people. And then on the left-hand side, going down the side, it talks about the different aspects of the flood and the account of the flood, like man in transgression, well, sinful man, right? Divine destruction, favored family, being like Noah's family, an ark, destruction by water, humans saved, etc., etc. There's various different things here that are part of the flood account. And all of these cultures have at least some of this account in their traditions. Somewhere in their traditions, they have a flood story about destruction of the world. You can see destruction by water is a big thing that goes all the way across. All of these seem to agree that there was this event in the past. Humans were saved. Most all of them agree that the humans were saved. I don't know why we would have a huge flood and then the humans weren't saved, and where would we be then? I don't know, but there's a few that don't have that. But nonetheless, the idea is this is a pretty common thing. And the weirdest one to me is on the left-hand side, those two columns going down. Those are both different Babylonian cultures, and I don't know the difference in the two because it says Assyrio-Babylonia 1 and Assyrio-Babylonia 2. I'm just going to count it as Babylon and not worry about it. But those two basically almost totally agree with the biblical account, and they would have been very near people or a very near culture to those events. So the fact that they agree so much with the biblical account of the flood in their traditions, that's pretty good. Now, all of this is just circumstantial evidence, of course, right? But the fact that all these cultures and all these people had this account in their past, in their history at some point, kind of leads us to believe that yes, that this is indeed something that occurred in some manner in the past. So just that kind of idea. Okay, so if we look at some real like evidence that you can look at and see, this is a picture of the Grand Canyon. Now, I've not been to the Grand Canyon. Some of you probably have, I think. But nonetheless, if you look at the different layers that are here in this picture, the different layers of the, what do you call it, the stones, well, anyway, the different layers you can see there of the canyon walls, we'll call it, whatever. There's some light layers there, some light sandstone layers, which they believe, when I say they, I mean the general, not Christian consensus, think that there used to be an ancient desert here, and that's how you have that leftover sandstone buried. It's near the top, but it's still buried below other layers. However, as Christians, from what we see, when we see all these layers, we see where the flood brought in all these sediments, all these layers of sediment, and laid them down. And some were heavier than others and were more at the bottom. Some are lighter and more at the top, like the sandstone. And then it brought all that sediment in with it, the flood waters. You think of the ocean coming in like that. And then when it receded, of course, it caused some erosion and caused to kind of shape out some of the canyons and things that we see there. We see that water did that. So this is evidence of the flood because, like I said, the ocean brought in all this sediment and laid it down, and nice, neat. You'll notice the layers are very nice and neat and pretty uniform. It's not something that would really happen if what basically the world would tell us that these were each laid down over millions and millions of years. those layers would not be so nice and neat and, as they are. So just something to notice and realize there. If we look at the Badlands, now this is the Badlands. Again, there's a lot of the same layering that we see. A lot of it's very, very uniform. You can plainly see those lines very good. Now, one thing to remember about when we talk about the floodwaters were pretty rough and pretty churning to do what they were supposed to do. But our ocean, even just on a normal day, has a lot of tides and ebbs and currents to it, has a lot of action. And that's because the moon and its gravitational pull, at least partly, is it acts kind of like God's stirring stick or something, and it keeps the waters moving so that our ocean isn't stagnant. So we're not a world of, say, algae or mold or something. Everything is kept moving, and so it's not stagnant, and that's an important thing to realize. If we look at Genesis chapter 7, verses 11 and 12, though, in the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, the 17th day of the month, on that day, all the fountains of the great deep were broken up, and the fountains of heaven were opened. And the rain was on the earth 40 days and 40 nights. So there's a lot of violence here that we may not recognize. The flood is coming from below and from above, and the water is really being churned and moved. And this is creating a lot of the destruction and the changes in the earth that we're going to see in our other images. If we look at verses 18 through 22, the waters prevailed and greatly increased on the earth, and the ark moved about on the surface of the waters. And the waters prevailed exceedingly on the earth, and all the high hills under the whole heaven were covered. The waters prevailed 15 cubits upward, and the mountains were covered. And all flesh died that moved on the earth, birds and cattle and beasts, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth, and every man. All in whose nostrils was the breath of the Spirit of life, all that was on the dry land died. So the ark is moved on the water because the water is moving. The water is churning and moving. It's not just like the water goes up and the ark goes up and everything comes back down in its place, because that's not what God was doing. The water is agitated, it's moving. This is not a peaceful, easy type of thing. If we look at chapter 6, verse 7, this is what God is doing with this water, of course. So the Lord said, I will destroy man whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, creeping things, and birds of the air, for I am sorry that I've made them. And I believe that I had mentioned earlier that when he's talking about destroying man, he's talking about wiping them off the face of the land. And that's part of why the water is so active and why we see this violence, because it's wiping things off the land. Now, if we come back to our layers for just a moment, this is another picture of the Badlands. These are a little more colorful layers. But again, these are obvious signs of the flood coming in and laying down all this sediment and covering a lot of things up. And then as the water withdraws, it creates a lot of the eroded effects that we see, such as the canyons and things. So, and we see these layers all over the world. Like, here are some layers, and you can really see on the bottom, the bottom layers there, how uniform they are. And these are in Argentina, but we see these layers like this all over the world, not just in our country. It's just I have better pictures of our country. So, moving away from the rock layers and looking at something that we call polystrate trees. I didn't really know the word for this, but I do now. So you'll not find me using it very often, though, I'm sure. But polystrate trees. These are trees that we find fossilized through multiple layers of those layers that we talk about, that we were just talking about. These trees are fossilized, and yet they extend through multiple layers. If those layers took millions of years to be laid down very slowly, no tree would survive millions of years without either continuing to grow in some way or something. Trees just would not. And we find them like this picture. Now, this is someone's drawing, of course, but like we find them buried upside down. Sometimes they're tilted one way or the other. And some of the trees are still standing as if rooted in the ground. But nonetheless, they're extending through these layers, which they could not possibly have survived through millions and millions of years like that. And you're going to see a few pictures. This is one here. This is a fossilized tree trunk, and I'm just reading the thing here. It goes through many different layers of rock that allegedly took millions of years to be laid down. And yet this tree is there. And if this tree had been there that long and it was alive, it would be growing, right? And trees grow like I grow now. I grow around, okay? That's how trees grow. They do grow up, though. But nonetheless, we would see some of that evidence. Plus, and then again, not plus, but then too, if it was dead, if the tree was dead, it would rot and it would fall apart over millions of years. It wouldn't still be formed like that through millions and millions of years. That wouldn't happen. Normally, that would not happen. Now, with the flood, that's different. The flood comes in, covers it up very quickly. It all happens very fast because the flood only lasts a little over a year. Okay, so we need to remember that. So it comes in, it covers these things up, and then these things are basically preserved and allowed to fossilize as they were. We see another polystrate tree here, and they seem to point out 4 stratas, but I really only see the top 3 that the tree is going through. Nonetheless, the point is still made that even if these were 1 million years apiece, no tree is going to last 3 million years to have this stuff form around it in a long, slow period of time. Again, this is another one. This tree, this part of this tree, which you can't tell if it was whole or not, about 6 foot? If you go by that little hammer, if that little hammer is maybe a foot long, maybe that's about 6 foot of tree. There's a lot more of these all over the world. Some of these same pictures I used, but there's a lot more of these all over the world. And these are evidences of a gigantic flood coming in and covering them up suddenly and quickly and preserving them. Now, moving on past trees and kind of past the layers, really. This is something that they call, let me just read this. They call this the Morrison Formation. The Morrison Formation is a sedimentary rock formation in the western United States, renowned for its rich fossil content, particularly dinosaur remains. Anyway, it's one big, huge fossil graveyard out to the west. And you can see it extends from the top, well, I hope you can see that, from Canada down into New Mexico, and it's pretty wide going out into Nebraska and the Dakotas, and then coming over even into Utah and Arizona and up there. So this is a pretty big fossil graveyard, and the reason it's renowned for, I'm just going to say this, particularly dinosaur bones or dinosaur remains, is because that's what gets all the attention. It doesn't matter how many mammals, how many birds, how many other fossils they find with dinosaurs. Dinosaurs are the rock stars of that, archaeology kind of thing, right? They're the things everybody wants to hear about. They're what all the kids want to read about, all that type of thing. And when I was a kid, I was the same way. So I understand that. So we don't always hear about all the other fossils that are found, though I'll have some examples of some other things mixed in with these dinosaurs that prove that, what we're told about the history of dinosaurs and stuff isn't really exactly accurate. Anyway, moving on, these fossil graveyards do exist all over the world again. This is a fossil graveyard from Mongolia, and you can just see that's just a mess of creatures. And this is the type of thing we'd expect to see with the flood, where a lot of animals are just swept up. If I back up for just a minute, if you think about the flood coming in, washing all these animals' corpses up to what's there that's going to stop them? The Rocky Mountains, right? So the Rocky Mountains, the ocean, even though the flood covered the mountains, all these bodies would not be floating on top going over the mountains. They would be washed up to like the foot of the mountains. And then as the water receded, some of those would be kind of spread back out on the way out. That type of thing. That's the idea of this formation. It's the way we kind of see that developing. So anyway, this is what we would expect to see from the flood, would be graveyards of animals like this just kind of washed up together in certain places. I'm going to read this quote here. One of the more challenging realities of the fossil record for evolutionists to explain are the vast graveyards of animal remains that are found throughout the world. And that's because it doesn't fit the narrative, the evolutionary narrative, to see all these animals washed up like this together. This really suits more of the biblical narrative, which would go directly against evolution and a lot of the other things that are taught. So this just shows, again, that a lot of the things that we're told about dinosaurs and how things were isn't exactly correct. So, and these are all interconnected with the atheistic viewpoint of the world when you want to eliminate God and you want to eliminate the creation event and the Bible. So, all right, so is every fossil from the flood? No. No, I'm not trying to say that, and I realized as I came through this, it's like I'm saying everything is from the flood, and that's not exactly right, because there have been other floods, there have been volcanic eruptions, mudslides, landslides, avalanches, earthquakes, tsunamis, hurricanes, typhoons, cyclones. Just choose your devastation. This world has a lot of other events, smaller events than the flood, but they still happen. And any disaster that causes a quick death and covering up or burial of the creature or plant can create a fossil. Fossils are not created by, let's just say, I die and I fall out in the yard out there, and y'all leave me there for 1,000,000 years. Well, in 1,000,000 years, you're not going to find anything. There's not going to be a fossil. I'm going to be scavenged by all kinds of critters. My bones are going to be spread around all over the place, and they'll just dry up to dust and all that. I mean, you're not going to find a fossil out of that. And yet, we have been told by certain people that fossils are formed that way, but that's not how fossils are formed. They're formed quickly by dying and being covered up quickly. That's how we get the fossils we get. For instance, such as this guy. Now this poor guy, he was unfortunate. He's having his last meal and he dies and he doesn't get to finish it. Now that's just sad. So, but he died so fast and he was covered up so fast, and I don't know if you can see this quite as well. All his scales and everything are represented there. And his fish stick, the person he's eaten or the fish he's eaten, they still have all their scales. Everything is still there. So that's how fast that happened to them. They were covered up and died, and I don't know when or how this was created, but nonetheless, this fossil shows us how that happened. So beyond that, we do have plant fossils as well. This is like a fern-like plant. I think I mentioned some of this during our talk about the flood, that some plants, of course, were destroyed and different things happened to them. Not all of them. A lot of plants can survive being underwater for a year, but nonetheless, and of course, God is responsible for all this, so whatever he wanted to have happen, of course, was going to happen too. So, but nonetheless, there we have that. There's an interesting, this is supposed to be an undersea plant, and it had a name that I couldn't say, so. An undersea plant that was found as a fossil in Germany. I thought that was interesting, plus it has kind of a cool look. So I'll just mention that. We do see some bird fossils as well, and these are often found, like I said, with the dinosaur fossils. And we know that birds were created before land animals, so it makes sense that we see that. The worldly narrative, though, doesn't always agree with that. Nonetheless, I don't know if you can see it as well on this picture. Maybe you can. You can see the feathers and the plumage and all are represented there. And there's a better picture, this one, which I think this one's more famous anyway. But you can see, again, the feathers and the plumage. This bird was killed and covered up quickly. It even looks like it had a rough kind of thing. So, whatever happened to it. So, you can plainly see that. There's no way that this thing died and fell on the ground and formed a fossil like that. Its feathers and stuff would never survive that. It's just silly. So, and then you have scavengers and other things, right? So another unusual thing we see in the fossil record. In the Himalayas, they have fish fossils high in the Himalayan mountains. We see similar things like that all over the world. Here's some other fossils they found in the Himalayas. And you notice these are more of the clams and those shelled creatures that tend to stay at the bottom of the ocean, right? But they got washed up here on the Himalayas. So just to mention that and show you that as evidence. And then if you come back to the Grand Canyon, they also have marine fossils in the Grand Canyon in different layers, like the different layers we were looking at earlier. And they range from 10,000 to 16,000 feet above sea level. So this is 2 and 3 miles above sea level that they see those fossils, those marine fossils. So it would make sense. We would not be surprised to see this, knowing that the flood happened the way it did. So to wrap all this up, though, I do want to bring us back to Genesis. If we look at Genesis chapter 8, verses 2 through 5, the fountains of the deep and the windows of heaven were also stopped, and the rain from heaven was restrained, and the waters receded continually from the earth. At the end of the 150 days, the waters decreased. Then the ark rested in the 7th month, the 17th day of the month, on the mountains of Ararat. And the waters decreased continually until the 10th month. In the 10th month, on the first day of the month, the tops of the mountains were seen. So if we think of the flood coming in, like I was talking about earlier, and the damage that it would do, and that happened over the course of like 6 months, and then we think of the water receding and the erosion and damage that would cause, and that too was about 6 months. So we have 6 months of water and sediment coming in and burying things, and then we have 6 months of that water receding and carving out canyons and things of that nature. We would expect to see the entire landscape of the world to be affected, and that is what we do see. So if we look at Genesis chapter 8, verse 14, and in the 2nd month, on the 27th day of the month, the earth was dried. So eventually it was dry, and remember they left the ark, and it would be interesting to see the world the way they saw it when they came out of the ark. That would be interesting. But I do want to take us back and remind us of what Peter said, that the world deliberately forgets. They try to erase God's account in history that he gives us, and I want to remind us to not fall for that deceit. God gives us his account in Genesis for a purpose, and it's so we will know these things. How did we get here? Why are we here? Why are things the way they are? And what do we do now? What are we supposed to do, right? What's our purpose? So God answers these questions for us right here in these first few chapters of Genesis, because he doesn't want us to be ignorant of these things. He wants us to have these answers so that we're not stressed and worried and wondering about these things. Because when people don't know these things, it does bother them. They are worried about those things. They don't understand why life is the way it is. But he gives us the peace of knowing and understanding. That doesn't mean we always like everything that happens, but at least we know and understand a lot more about it. So I pray that all of you already know the answers to all these things, and we've tried to be clear about these things when we were looking through Genesis here, and even at other times before. And here we have this time of invitation. If for any reason you don't understand or don't know these things, and you can definitely come forward. We can discuss these things. We could do another study on these things. As we end here, I want to look at Matthew chapter 24, verses 37 through 39. As all of you know, Jesus is answering the disciples, letting them know how the end will be. But as the days of Noah were, so also will the coming of the Son of Man be. For as in the days before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage until the day that Noah entered the ark, and did not know until the flood came and took them all away. So also will the coming of the Son of Man be. I always want to move that be in that sentence, but nonetheless. So we don't know when the Lord is going to return. And we're just going to be living our lives, even us. We don't know when he's going to return. We're just going to be living our lives until he does return. And then when he returns, it's going to be too late. We don't want to wait until then to be right with God. And in the same way, we don't know how long we're going to be living here in this life. We don't know how long it will be before we as an individual pass on. We're just going to be living our life, and then we're going to pass away for whatever reason. Sometimes we know a little bit ahead of time, sometimes we don't. And I keep saying that our ark is the body of Christ, and we need to make sure that we're all in that ark and that we are belonging to Jesus, so that no matter what happens, when we pass or whether the Lord returns before that, we will be with him. So if there's anything that you need that we could help you with this evening, we just ask that you please come forward and let us know as we stand and sing.